are missing one today, it looks like. A little shorter one today for class. And I wanted to finish the lab from yesterday, but my iPad ended up being left at home. No Beto, that's weird. All right, so today we're going to talk about specific sport training. So kind of like before, this has been kind of like overall things. So now we're going to get a little more specific and like ways to train for this. And we'll go into a way more detail on this when you take theory and technique of weight training. It's kind of one of those senior classes that you take your last year. And that's where we have a little bit more detail. And yeah, so we're going to go into that. So when you're training for a specific sport, you want positive stress on your body for that sport. So major adaptations take about 6 to 10 weeks. So if you're trying to get stronger for basketball season, you really need to be hitting the weight room 6 to 10 weeks before that, working on sport-specific things for that sport. So basketball and volleyball, you're going to want to be doing plyometrics multiple times a week to get faster, get quicker. You're going to want to do a lot of squats to get your legs stronger. You want to do a lot of bench press for your arms. So whatever specific things you need to do. Everything is dependent on volume intensity of stress or training. So the rate of adaptation is kind of limited to genetics, which we slightly touched on before, is some people are more adept to a certain sport. The easiest one to think about that is if you ever watch marathons or long distance running in the Olympics. What country tends to be the fastest? Anybody know? It's not every single time, but most of the time, what countries are the best marathon runners?
Jamaica?
That's sprinting.
Oh,
Sprinting. Which ones tend to be the long distance runners? Now that one's he's an outlier because he's a white guy. Kenyans. There's almost always Kenyans in the top 5, and usually it's like 3 of the top 5 are from Kenya. I don't know what it is about the genetics of those Kenyans, but they're just genetically built for long distance running. The guy who got the dunk the other day against that zone in the last bit of the game there, guys? Javon? Is he the one who got the big dunk? I look at him jump, and I just look at how he is built. The man has no calves, but he can jump through the roof. So like the amount of muscle fibers in his calves just does not seem to be allocated to the amount of jump that he has. So he must have a whole lot of fast twitch fibers in that very small muscle group. And a lot of that, I would say, is probably genetics. That's just how he is built. Lucky guy. I am not one of them. I've never been the quick guy. So too much training can decrease performance and increase injury. And we'll go over that a whole lot more here as we go. So you want to balance the volume, so that would be the amount of lifting and the intensity of the lifts that you're going to do. So a correct balance will enhance performance. Overtraining can actually cause people to get sick. They're going to be tired all the time. Their muscles are always going to be tired, or they're going to be injured a lot. And we'll get to those details here in a little bit. Undertraining, you kind of want to do that in your off season. So right after your season ends. Beto here would be in his off season. The soccer season just finished, so now is when he's going to have a lot more active rest. I'd tell him he should be doing a lot more stretching for his kind of workouts. Maybe 2 days in the weight room, alternating with some stretching, 2 days probably. Then you want to do your acute training overload, so that'd be the average training load. Overreaching is when somebody's actually going too far, so not allowing their muscles. So basically doing a full body workout 3 days a week, and then the other 3 days you're doing like an upper body and then a lower body. So you're overtraining your muscles and not allowing them to recover. That's the easiest way to get to that. And then overtraining is when you get way too far and all of a sudden they just stop. They just don't work well. So here's what that looks like in a chart. So you kind of have your undertraining time where there's so minor physiological changes and hopefully no performance, because you can't, how long do we say that it takes for you to start having fall off in your performance? How long can you sit around? 2 to 3 weeks. So undertraining, so making sure you're doing something to keep yourself from having that fall off after 2 weeks. All right, so more details on these. So overreaching would be a planned attempt to overstress the body. So this would be when after your undertraining period or your off season, now you're getting into the next quarter. So for Beto here, that would mean after Christmas, I would say, maybe after Thanksgiving, is when he should be in the weight room 3 to 4 times a week, doing an alternating kind of workout so that he can get bigger and faster. He's probably going to overeat a little bit to have extra calories so that he can maintain his body weight. This would also be a time where they would purposely try to get extra calories so that then they can cut it off later, in like spring quarter is when you start to do your cuttings part of that. So you will have a little bit of performance decrement, followed by improved performance. So this is one of the things that's the hardest for my high schoolers to understand is when we work on, say, shooting. Anytime you make a performance change in how you shoot the ball, you're going to have a period where you're going to miss more than you make. It's just going to be tough. And so you have to fight through that to make any changes to your shot or to your body in order to get better. The one I had the hardest time with weight training class was my golf game. Now, I played basketball and golf in college, and I struggled. The first little bit, I actually did way better. It was interesting. So I was like working out in class, and I'd go play golf afterwards, and I'm like, man, I feel like I'm doing so well. And it just felt great after about a month, maybe 6 weeks, as my muscles started to get some hypertrophy. All of a sudden, I could not swing a golf club. I would top it, I would chunk it, I could not make good contact. And I went through like a 3-week period where I didn't even try playing a round of golf. I was like, I'm just going to the driving range to make sure I'm getting contact with the ball. So I had a performance just dropped now after about 3 weeks. All of a sudden, I got used to where my new muscles were because it felt like instead of my shoulders being here, it felt like my hands were just like pushed out in front because my chest muscles were getting bigger and my triceps were getting bigger. And I adjusted my golf swing and it got better. And I ended up hitting it about 15 yards farther with my driver. But it took a good 3 weeks of like decline where I was like shanking it and it was just bad. So excessive training. So this is when, so your volume intensity both go to the extreme. So for years, a lot of athletes have undertrained. And then as intensity or volume goes up, so did the performance. Kind of like my golf game right away. It felt like it was doing really good. But the more is better is only true to a point. So for example, swim training 3 to 4 hours per day is not going to probably improve you more than an hour to an hour and a half a day. So it's possible that strength and sprint performance could be different when it comes to these. But the concept here is more is not necessarily better. So in another study, and I'll show you the chart here in a second, a single versus multiple training sessions. So there's no evidence, at least in swimming, that more is better. This heart rate was the same, the blood lactate was improved, but there's no improvements to a 2-time over having multiple times per day. So here is the 2 different groups here, changes in their lactate concentrations, depending on how many weeks they had trained. So notice it went down and it kind of plateaued here. let's see, it's changes in blood concentration. This would be heart rates during standardized 400 yards swim over 25 weeks. Ooh, that's a long study. So from the beginning to the 5th week and at the end of the 10th week, one group trained once per day. So that'd be, looks like the blue, trained once per day. And another group worked out twice a day. So a little bit of improvement. It would be interesting to run a t-test or see what the t-test was. Like, was this statistically significant or not? So it looks like it's about 10 beats per minute. So training volume should be sport specific. So when they talk about volume, that's like how many reps times how much weight you're doing at a time. And that volume is questionable depending on what you're doing. You're not going to want to do a whole lot of like 3 sets of 5 at 80% of your max in the middle of your basketball season. It's going to be a detriment to your performance. So that would be a way of overtraining. Now, I do think that our basketball team should be in the weight room twice a week now that you've started your season. And even if it's for like 30 to 45 minutes. And it doesn't have to be an extreme amount of weights, but doing 10 to 15 reps on different exercises is going to keep you at top performance. So low intensity, high volume is inappropriate for a sprint type performance. Same for like soccer or most team sports that are basically sprint based. Basketball is sprint based, soccer is sprint based. So intensity and volume are inversely related. So if volume is up, intensity should be down, or vice versa. If intensity is up, your volume should be down. So different emphasis are going to lead to different results. So when it comes to resistance for anaerobic or aerobic training, when you increase here I have a note on here that says when you increase the volume, you should add more recovery to your exercises. So that would mean some sort of stretching. Yoga is not a bad thing. I know there's sort of a stereotype against it, but I've had great success with doing yoga for stretching, and that comes to my gymnastics side as well. So, but if you increase your intensity and volume, so you're doing 5 sets of 8 on the same thing over and over. That's a lot of intensity and a lot of volume. The other one to always check on is the mental health of your athletes. I really like it when our medical professional is the same person all year long. So that's one thing that I don't like that we do here, where we have like 4 or 5 different trainers that are just PTs. And so you guys see a different trainer every time, like every Wednesday or something. I don't know what day they're here, but they come and check on you. Having that person do a mental health evaluation at the beginning of the year when you do your preseason evaluation. And then like partway through the season, end of the season, off season, kind of have the same mental health checks on people. So periodization, my goodness, we could probably do 2 or 3 class periods on just periodization. But a quick way of going over what this is. Traditional, there are going to be cycles, and it could be a multi-year thing. They call them microcycles. So that'd be a macro cycle, and a microcycle would be a few days. So it's best for athletes who focus on like one competition, so like a gymnastics type thing or a running meet. I think cross country just had a meet here a couple days ago for their like last run of the year. We missed a few people for one of my classes for that. Periodization is not necessarily optimal for team sports and for sports with skill developments, but there are definitely times of year in that macro cycle. But like few day cycles are probably not going to be good for a team sport. Block periodization is kind of something that's doing a little more recently, and when we do our T&T of weight training at your senior year, there's going to be a little more of that. So this allows for few skills or attributes, use 3 or 4 different blocks that last 2 to 4 weeks. Includes general exercises, specific exercises to stimulate those specific motor skills for that sport. I did P90X a couple of times. I know that's an older thing. I've gone through it a couple of times. And they have kind of a thing about muscle confusion. And it's probably the easiest way to explain the blocks that they're kind of talking about. And so every 30 days, they change your workouts. So you'll spend 4 weeks, 4 weeks, 4 weeks doing, one of them starts out with push-ups and pull-ups is on Monday. Tuesday is yoga. Wednesday is back or biceps, triceps is on Wednesday. And then Friday is leg and back day. So it's basically leg things and pull-ups is what most of that workout is. And then you come back to the second round. Now they're splitting it up. So now you're doing all pull things. So biceps, pull-ups are all going to be one day. Then they are doing all push things. So pushing legs, bench press, so chest, and I forgot what the other one was there. But they kind of change what the emphasis is to purposely mess up your muscles. Because you're going to start to adapt after a month. And then we're going to change what muscles are being used, and they're going to make it more intense. And then the third block is even more. So I'd say the easiest way to describe it is changing the workouts up every block. In this case, it was every 30 days. So overtraining is an unexplained drop in performance. So if somebody's shooting from the free throw line, is probably the easiest one to chart. Is if a player in the middle of the season, all of a sudden they just start missing 25% more free throws. So they go from an 80% free throw shooter down to a 65% free throw shooter. I'm like, wait, what has going on with this person? So that's where that would be kind of like that first key, like something's going wrong with this player. I'd probably first start with asking them, did something happen at home? Is your mental health okay? Because that's probably the first reason a performance thing would drop. Then I'd go actually looking at what kind of training are you doing? Is this person in the middle of the season just changed to a new cycle in their weight training and now their performance is dropping? That's why we don't want to do too much exercise or too much lifting in the middle of the season, because you don't want that kind of thing to happen. Sometimes it's more psychological and physiological. I kind of already said that. Not all fatigue products are of overtraining. So I have over here, you don't allow them to get there. Keep track of their sleep. There's a really interesting study, I don't know if I've talked about it in this class or not, where Stanford, they tracked their athletes, and this would be like their Division I basketball players, and they checked on their free throw percentage and three-point percentage, I think were the two that they charted. And they asked them, how many hours of sleep are you getting? They're like, okay, now after 2 weeks of the season, like, now I want you to get 1 more hour of sleep. And all of their players went up in their free throw percentage and up in their three-point percentage with 1 more hour of sleep. I'm like, wow, that's impressive. So sometimes it could be a psychological, physiological thing could be there. Another thing that you can check with this, and this is where your trainer at the beginning of the year, checking their resting heart rate and checking their blood pressure. If their blood pressure's up, that's a sign that maybe there's more stress on them, whether that's from home or from too much training. Those are all things that could cause a drop in performance. So highly individualized overtraining syndrome is a whole thing. So this is a little different than just straight overtraining. So the syndrome of it is that every person is a little bit different and why their performance is dropping. Their strength could go down. All of a sudden, like the ball's bouncing off their hands. Maybe their batting percentage is going down. Golf is a very precise sport. All of a sudden, they're missing fairways all the time, or they're not hitting greens like they used to. Change in appetite or weight loss, mood disturbances, depression. Pretty much all of these are, other than the top one here, all of these in the middle here are all signs of depression. And especially when you have multiple ones of these, I'd be really curious, about the mental health of my athletes. Other ones is it could be, overtraining. They're either too intense in their training or too much volume. They're doing too much plyometrics, or they're doing too many big lifts, trying to go for their 1 rep max too often. So we've talked plenty about the or the psychological things, and then some other immune systems. So there's no clear cause effects or parallels when it comes to overtraining. So this is what that could look like here. It's like a typical pattern of somebody is that they continue to get up or continue kind of generally going up. What can happen when they overtrain is now it just starts to continually go down over time. So something that can happen to your nervous system, and this is why I was saying you would want to check your player's blood pressure, is you want to, if their blood pressures increase, if they're not eating as much, unexplained weight loss. So again, this is why having the same trainer that's testing your athletes once a month in practice or just before or after practice. Checking on how much sleep, emotional disturbance. Maybe they had a breakup and that's causing a problem. You never know. So our parasympathetic nervous system, so this is the one that is going to kind of put your body into fight or flight reflex. So you're going to fatigue quicker when you're always in a fight or flight state. The heart rate decreases, blood pressure decreases, this is the one at the end. This is after. So sympathetic is what makes you go to fight or flight. Parasympathetic is the one that's you're recovering. It's more common in endurance athletes to have a low heart rate, that kind of thing. So the endocrine system, and then we'll take a standing break after this one. I don't know if I have any standing breaks in here for some reason. Oh man, way at the end here. So your endocrine, you're going to have thyroxism and testosterone maybe are dropping. When you're overtraining, the cortisol goes up. That's the bad hormone that makes you feel like depressed. The testosterone to cortisol ratio is going to get out of whack there, alter the ratio of protein catabolism. And usually this is volume related when you're overtraining. So this is what's happening to your endocrine system here as a possible cause of that overtraining that's going on. So this is what they were saying, like the testosterone to cortisol level is getting further and further apart. And let's see, this was swimmers. So during a 10-day period showing your swimmers increased their training from 4,000 meters to 8,000 meters per day. This data here shows their resting cortisol concentrations. The line graph shows a very linear increase of cortisol. And then the thyroxine and testosterone went down. And so this is over 10 days trying to increase. So they increased the volume. And this is what their endocrine system was doing to compensate for that increase in volume. All right, I'm going to give you a standing break there because I see a lot of people drifting on me. See if I have enough power to keep on going. All right, so continuing on here with the overtraining responses. So your blood urea concentration, so how yellow your pee is, can go up there. So that's one way to test if somebody's maybe having some issues there. Increased cytoplasms. Possible outside factors would be overreaching. May produce some trends. I think I'm trying to be ready for the beginning of the season, and so they're overtraining. I've got a meet coming up, either gymnastics or maybe a weightlifting meet. And so they're overtraining to get that. So the time between their last training bout compared to their resting blood sample is kind of critical there. So when you take those blood samples. So blood markers are helpful, but they're not definitive. So this whole thing here is like there's no like one way to diagnose overtraining. You just have to check everything basically. So some neurological factors. So overtraining stressors may act primarily through like hypothalamic signals, so more endocrine type system. So they can lead to sympathetic activation, so purposely dropping the body down. Can lead to a pituitary endocrine cascade. I had a friend that had a problem with his pituitary gland, and he ended up getting, man, he went from like 230 pounds to like 150 in like 3 months. And it was all because his endocrine system was just messed up. And I think it was a thyroid was his issue there. And so sometimes there's other things that can go wrong there. So hormones can get involved there. When those hormones get out of whack, it can. And he also was like sleeping all the time, and I forgot what everything else he did. I think we were juniors that year, and he ended up leaving second semester from the academy I was at. He was a boarding school like Rio, and so he went home for the last quarter of that year, or last half of the year. Let's see, other responses. So other immunoresponses would be circulating cytokines. So this could be some of the trauma that's going to happen from overtraining. So you're going to have inflammation. It's going to make the cytokines go up. So it's going to increase inflammation. It's going to have more muscle and bone joint trauma. So their muscles and bones are going to be complaining about things hurting more often. Come into practice, be like, Coach, man, I'm so sore. I'm like, what did you do today? Oh, man, I've been in the weight room for 2 hours, and now I'm coming to practice. I'm like, you might be overdoing it. Or maybe they tried to like hike a 25-mile hike the day before or over the weekend or something, and they come in complaining about being sore. So inflammation is going to go up. So this may act on the brain and the system, the body functions, and then those would also be another factor that could contribute to overtraining. Whew, man, big long chart here. So as your stressors happen, your hypothalamus is going to go, the sympathetic spinal nerves are going to tell the organs, you're going to get more adrenaline here. So it's going to inhibit the immune response, it's going to give extra energy and increase arousal. That's probably the better one. And then notice this one kind of loops back over and over again. So as we're saying, too many cytokines, parasympathetic nerves start telling things to happen. It's going to tell all the spleen, the thalamus, and other organs to have extra cortisone. The adrenal gland is going to go up. And this turns into a loop rather than one happens that right away there. Whew, man, that's a lot. So some other immune responses here. So compromised immune function is a factor of overtraining. So we already kind of mentioned that. So overtraining suppresses the immune function. So that's why a player who is overtraining would tend to be sick more often. Which seems kind of weird when a player is like in really good shape, especially if one of our like NAIA athletes here is, why are they sick all the time? Well, it could be their body's way of saying, we need to slow down because you're overtraining. So here's kind of these are kind of an inverse effect here. So as you start as a sedentary person, you start exercising more, immune function is going to go up, and your ability to get sick goes down. Hopefully that's where most of our college students are, is you're training a little bit, you're not going to get sick very often. What can happen though is when they overtrain, then the immune function goes down and they end up getting sick more often. So here's the one that's kind of probably the main thing that you need to know is how to predict overtraining syndrome. Now, as I say, there's no exact way to do it, so trying to diagnose it. So the threshold for each athlete is going to be different, so knowing a little bit about your athletes is going to help. Some coaches have intuition, like you just know your athletes and know that's when something's wrong. And say most of the time for me, it's going to be, I've seen it more of a psychological thing than a physiological thing. But I do have players that are coming in, they'll ask to use the shooting machine at lunch every day, all season long, and their shooting gets better, and then all of a sudden just falls off. That would be like, okay, this person might be overdoing it. Also, maybe their grades are dropping is another one that might be along with this, with the performance going down. There's no warnings or thing, so coaches tend to realize it too late sometimes, and you might have to give them just a week off. Did anybody ever watch The Last Dance? The documentary on the Bulls in like the 90s? They had a guy named Dennis Rodman, and he went up to Phil Jackson. He's like, Coach, I need to go let loose. I need to go to Vegas. And so Coach let him go to Vegas for 2 days. He came back, and they thought they were going to run him to death, and he had been up all night. And so the story goes, he lived across the street from the United Center there in Chicago. So after he got back, apparently Jordan went in and woke him up and drug him basically to practice. And then he outran everybody. Go figure. Because some people just need a little bit of time off, and then they come back in better shape than they were before. And it was just a psychological thing. So this would be some heart rates of a fast-paced treadmill run at 10 miles per hour. So we have a overtraining athlete and undertrained and overtrained. And notice where their heart rate is. So taking your resting heart rate of our athletes would be a good thing. So it's another way of figuring that out. So treatment of overtraining. So one would be to reduce the intensity of what they're doing. It could be just straight rest. So I don't recommend the whole let them go to Vegas thing that they did in there in that documentary. But having your players take a week off. Counseling is probably going to be a big deal here. Prevention, having your athletes on a schedule for how they're going to exercise during the season, before the season, after season, would probably be the best thing so that you're keeping track of it more. And making sure they're eating enough food, especially carbs. Not usually a problem on a college campus because most of the food that is in the calf is probably carbs, tragically. There does get to the point it can get so much past even overtraining that somebody actually has an addiction to exercise. And this sometimes would look like someone with an eating disorder where they're pretty much all the psychological factors that would go along with that. But you're watching somebody that is always in the gym, 6-7 days a week. They are constantly obsessed with, I need to go run, I need to go, it just gets a little bit too much. So continually exercising, even though they're injured, inconvenient for them. So they're skipping practice to go exercise. They're skipping classes to go exercise. They're skipping out on time with their family and friends to go exercise. Despite the lack of time, or they get really angry when somebody interrupts them or interrupts their training schedule. I got really worried when I had a guy come in when I was deaning. I only did it for a year, and this dude walked in, and he was like a sophomore, so he was 16 or 17. And he comes in with this really deep voice, like, Coach, I need to see your weight room so I can make sure it doesn't mess up my exercise schedule. Warning flag. So that was just first thing to keep an eye on. This guy, and he would go down and work out, and he'd have a hoodie on, sweats, and trying to sweat off everything. So he ended up being fine, and he let off a little bit. But the first few weeks there, my assistant dean and I were both watching this guy like a hawk, because we were worried that he was making up for something, psychological problems at home or something. Ended up not being a big deal. Ended up being a decent guy. Didn't have to worry about him too much. All right, standing break. Last one. All right, so now that we've gone kind of off the deep end, let's talk about the good side here. So we've talked about nasty, people overdoing it, psychological problems, overtraining. Let's talk about the good stuff about trying to be the best either physical therapist, athletic trainer, or coach that we can be. So tapering for peak performance. So before any major competition, you want to have recovery and healing so that they are ready for that main competition. For gymnastics, that could be anywhere between 4 to 28 days. It depends on what kind of competition you're going for. I have noticed that you don't want to have major long practices the day before a game. If anything, I'm going to cut my practices a little short the day before a game rather than going for 2.5 hours when my practices are normally 2 hours, because there's just usually a performance detriment. So I will probably have a much more focused practice where it's more like, here's the scouting report, here's how we're going to attack it, here's how we're going to get it past this. Those are all the things I would be going over. So the results, usually you give them a little bit of a break, they're going to have an increased muscular strength because your muscles are going to be prepared, your glycogen reserves are all going to be replenished, all those contractile mechanisms are ready, are going to be really good. So especially for something like a marathon runner, giving them X number of days before that marathon where they don't train at all so that they are fully recovered and ready for that massive effort. So 3 to 4 days before. Making sure you're there early enough to be acclimatized to whatever climate you're in. All those things are a great part of it. So this not, when you're tapering down, this would be not necessarily deconditioning. So it'd be considerable training to reach that VO2 max. So possible reduction from 40 to 60% to maintain their VO2 max. And this would be if you're doing like a 28 days before a marathon. So you do need to do some training, but probably leaving it a little more tapered down compared to that. They found that it actually improves the race time of a marathon runner by about 3% when you have a little bit of tapering before. More interesting one would be for like a big lifting meet, like a weight training meet. 18 to 25% improvement in arm strength and power. Now, we don't know as much about the effects for team sports, is where we're at on this one. Keep on going here. So detraining, so this would be the loss of it. So partial or complete detraining. So brief one, you're going to be kind of like tapering, and that's one we want to work on. What you don't want is a long time of detraining. So having atrophy from that. When I was in a cast for, oh goodness, it was 6 weeks. And then they put me in a boot after that. Like, there was considerable change in my calf from the side that had a cast on it to the one that didn't. Like, you could totally see one calf was about this big, the other one was about that big. So it was a huge difference. And my wife was like, wow, I didn't think atrophy would hit in 6 weeks like that. Like, so much that she could like visually see. So as they're saying, immobilization, you're definitely going to have loss of mass, strength, and power. Not training anymore. So atrophy is the big one that you're going to see the most. Loss of mitigated by low-level exercises. So that's what they're saying. 40 to 60% of your normal training load will keep detraining from happening. So in your off season here, Beto, you're going to need to keep training 40 to 60%. So maybe that would be a fun pickup game, or maybe intramurals for futsal that you need to sign up for a team, I'm assuming. That's right. Caleb is going to end. Actually, all three of you guys are in the reffing class, so you're all going to be reffing his soccer games. So muscle endurance is going to drop quicker than others. So this can be seen after about 2 weeks. So you won't be able to go as long and for whatever you're doing. I am currently trying to increase my running load and biking load so that I am ready for intramurals after Christmas. So I'm starting now to increase that, especially now that it's cooler outside. Like, biking outside is great, especially when you put a 30-pound kid right in front of you on your bike. So here's what a chart would look like after weeks of detraining. So the cytochrome oxidasis is going to drop quite a bit. Your VO2 max after 2 weeks is only going down a little bit, but after 2 to 4, it's going to go down 8%. I think that's what it says over here. Yeah. And the SDH here is muscle suffocate dehydrogenase activity. So some sort of blood work that they were checking there. They experienced this. They used a metabolic panel, so they did blood work on them to get these other two after however many weeks. VO2 max doesn't change after 2 weeks, but then will decline about 5%, 8% at 6 weeks. It would be interesting to see where that VO2 max goes down after more than 6 weeks. So glycogen stores are going to drop by about 40%. Your acid-base imbalance is going to change there too. All those adaptations your body made because of all the exercise you're doing, it's all going to revert back. What would it be? Changes in glycogen content of the deltoid muscle. So they took blood work from the deltoid. Ooh, I got a flu shot yesterday. I hadn't actually pushed on that muscle. I'm like, oh man, I can kind of feel where that was. So you can see after 2 weeks of detraining here, it's getting real close to that person that is untrained. 4 weeks, really close there. So there's what that would look like in actual numbers. So their blood lactate level goes up quite a bit. pH goes down. Blood concentration there. So training, only moderate amount of speed. Detraining, only moderate is going to be at lower speeds. Form, skill, and flexibility. Whew, man, I've noticed that one. My poor wife trying to do, we're going to Acrofest next week. And she is not as flexible as she was after pregnancy. 3 more, almost done. So there's going to be significant cardiorespiratory losses. And this one's pretty easy to get. Bed rest studies. So that would be anyone that gets put on bed rest. I would say probably the easiest one would be an athlete mother who gets put on bed rest for their baby. So their max heart rate goes up, the submax stroke volume goes down, the plasma volume goes down, 27% reduction in VO2 max. So in trained athletes, the VO2 max is going to be faster with detraining, and it's going to be tougher to get it back, sadly. So how much activity do you need to prevent any losses? So this one's saying 70% VO2 max training is probably the number. Losses occur when frequency and duration decreases by 2/3. So working at about 75%, 65% of your training load is going to deplete that. So Beto over here needs to be in the weight room doing about 60%, 65% of what he would be doing normally so that he doesn't detrain, so that he's ready for that intramural season coming up here in a couple of days. So I did kind of talk about this the other day, is when you go to space, there's no gravity. And so your muscles tend to drop off very quickly. So having less gravity is going to detrain your muscles. So they said that detraining may actually be beneficial in space because you're going to use different muscle groups. Muscle mass and strength are going to go down, the different types of fibers. Without muscle stress, you're actually going to have a bone loss of about 4%. That's a pretty big number in a very short amount of time there. So interestingly enough, the stroke volume in no gravity goes up. So like your muscles or your heart's going to be able to push more because there's less pressure going against it, and there's going to be more venous return. But even though your heart rate's going to be more efficient, there's going to be less blood volume, and oddly enough, that's due to less fluid intake because it's actually very, very dry in space because there's no humidity. So that's one main reason of that. So they tested, astronauts immediately after they came back from space. So their VO2 max was down due to plasma volume and leg strength. I've actually seen videos of astronauts being carried out of the capsules or whatever that they had in the water. Like they couldn't stand up because they just had no leg muscles anymore. So similar to the things as with bed rest, their VO2 max is going down. So what they actually do in space is they'll have a treadmill with exercise bands around their waist that will simulate gravity that they have to exercise on so that they don't get atrophy in their legs or in their arms. They do a little better on the arms because, I mean, at least you're pulling yourself around and using them, but you don't really use your legs in space because we spend our whole day getting 10,000 steps a day, and we always have gravity against it, and your bones are also used to it. And that's all I got today. We will try to do our VO2 max tomorrow. I did not get up there this morning to make sure the machine's running. So tomorrow the plan is come ready to run.
Oh, the treadmills?
Yeah, we will run on a treadmill. Only one person gets to go at a time. Hopefully we can get 2 people through the test, as long as the machine works. And if it doesn't, if you're not in the test, so you're either a person that's running the test, or you're a person, or it takes 2 other people to administer. So one person's like making the thing go up and down, another person's running the machine. The person pushing the buttons up and down has the chart, and then they'll ask the person, what is your perceived amount of exertion? So on a scale of 1 to 20, how hard are you working right now? So you'll point to that as you go. And we'll do a little video tomorrow on how to run the machine and how to do everything before. So probably 1 person's the max, but if you're not in it, so like Steven missed class the other day, so you need to do the lab that we did on Tuesday, and you can work on that while the other 4 are working on the VO2 max machine. And then you'll do that. I think next week we have Tuesday next week we have another VO2 max day. And so we'll just kind of rotate around through that. This is my plan. So, any questions? Good luck. Have a good day.